Well, I'd say the place to begin is who has a stake in the sustainability of the fish resource? And no one has a bigger financial stake than the fishermen themselves. And the result is that the fishing fleet as a whole has always been on the side of science. So there's been consistently quite a good relationship between the fishing fleet and the science.
We're always in contact with the industry, and we want to know what the port can do to help facilitate their work and to make it go smoother, more efficient, and better.
Ray Hilborn. I'm a professor in the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences at the University of Washington, and I work on population dynamics, particularly fisheries and fisheries management. We have on the order of 25 faculty members who work on a range of aquatic sciences. So in terms of fisheries and fisheries management, I think I could safely say we're probably the largest. And I'd say we've had an outsized influence on the science used to manage fisheries.
So we work really closely with the University of Washington with the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences. And so there does tend to be a direct connection between the research being conducted by academia and then how it is applied, the research is applied to what we do.
The port provides the infrastructure and the location for what is a business hub that supports the fishing industry itself. We have at Terminal 91 in the uplands, we have warehouses for the fishing companies, for some of their vendors. They're all co-located in the same location, which makes it efficient for their operations. They can go from customer to customer. The knowledge base is here as well. But yeah, the port ensures that the infrastructure is there to support this fleet and to help them do the work that they need to do. And they provide us and the world with a delicious low-carbon footprint protein source that is arguably the most sustainably managed large-scale fishery on the planet. Well, I think we can be proud in this region to have a fishery that demands science-based sustainable management for the fishery. And every one of these vessels, the pollock vessels, has observers. Most of them have 2 fisheries observers on board at all times when they're out doing the fisheries, collecting the science.
I mean, I think science informs all of the work that we do. The research that is conducted either through academia or applied sciences. So, all of that information informs future design. So the research is key to make sure that what we're building means something.
So sustainability also is a process. And if your management process works well, that maintains the sustainability, so long as something doesn't happen to the ecosystem. And so, the pollock fishery is sustainable because NOAA maintains a really good science program that tracks the changes in abundance. So it's a combination of science, regulations, enforcement of the regulations that's really the key ingredient in sustainability.